Hello, and welcome to the Washington Institute. I'm Rob Satloff, the Institute's Siegel Executive Director, and I want to welcome everyone watching, wherever you may be, to this very special event, a policy forum to examine the conflict that is underway between Israel and Iran, its implications for the people of the region, its implications for U.S. strategic interests, and where American policy may be headed as a result of this important event. I think we are witnessing, as we speak, the most significant military conflict to occur in the region in at least 20 years. Today, this conflict may have begun just late last week, but it really began perhaps on October 7th, 2023. And for some people, this is only the most recent chapter of a conflict that began in 1979. Will it bring an end to this conflict? Will we see important structural changes in the threat that was posed for years by Iran's developing nuclear program? Are we going to see even broader political change in the region? I'm delighted that we have a panel of outstanding Washington Institute experts that will examine all aspects of the conflict underway and offer their view on where this may be going, including for the potential American role as it develops in coming days. Let me first mention that if you want to get into this conversation, there are two ways for you to do that as we proceed to our Q&A session. You may look at the Q&A function of your Zoom bar and type in a question, which I will try to get into the conversation, or you can email me directly at rsatloff@washingtoninstitute.org, and I'll be monitoring that email throughout today's program. Again, I'm delighted to welcome four of my colleagues here at the Washington Institute. First will be Michael Eisenstadt. Mike is our Kahn Senior Fellow and Director of the Institute's Military and Security Studies program. Mike has been writing about the challenge of Iran's nuclear program for years. Indeed, just 2 months ago, Mike published this stunningly prescient study titled "Attacking Iran's Nuclear Program: The Complex Calculus of Preventive Action." If you haven't seen it, please go to the Washington Institute website once we're finished with this program. Download it, read it, to expand your understanding of what is going on in the Middle East today. Mike will offer contextual remarks about the challenges of undertaking what Israel has undertaken and of the challenges Iran faces of responding to what is going on. Then we will turn to our colleague Zohar Palti, who is in Israel. Zohar, a former senior official of the Israeli Ministry of Defense, of the Israeli IDF, and Israel's Secret Services. Zohar is a Viterbi International Fellow. He will report to us on the situation inside Israel and on Israeli planning for what may lie ahead. Then we'll turn to Dana Stroll. Dana is the Institute's Michael and Shelley Casson Senior Fellow and our Director of Research. She served throughout the Biden administration as the top civilian official in the Pentagon with responsibility for the Middle East. That's Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense in the Office of Secretary of Defense. And Dana will give us insight into the American decision-making, how to provide, what to provide, when to provide, the sort of support that is essential as we see in the battlefield in the Middle East. And then finally, we'll turn to my colleague, Ambassador Dennis Ross. Dennis is joining us from Amman, Jordan. He just recently left Israel and made his way to Amman on his way back here to the United States. And Dennis will give us, Dennis is our Davidson Distinguished Fellow and Counselor at the Institute. And Dennis will offer a broader strategic perspective on how the diplomacy may connect with what's happening in the military conflict and just how this may end. So, lots to talk about. Let's jump right in with my colleague, Mike Eisenstadt.
Thanks, Rob, and good day to everybody. Just a few contextual remarks at the background to this conflict. It occurred, without getting into the debate whether it was preemption, prevention, it occurred against the background of apparent moves by Iran to resume weaponization research and development. There was in July of 2024, an Office of the Director of National Intelligence Assessment that stated that Iran had, quote, undertaken activities that better position it to produce a nuclear device if it chooses to do so. There were a series of news reports in the summer of last year, which stated that Iran had resumed metallurgical research and computer modeling work that could be related to weapons work. When the Israelis struck Iran in October of last year, they struck a facility at Parchin called the Talagan 2 site, which in the past had been associated with weapons work, specifically with regard to the production of plastic explosives for a nuclear device. So against this background, and especially against the background of October 7th, Israel concluded that it could no longer live with an Iran that was committed to its destruction, and that was a nuclear threshold state with an ever larger stockpile of high-enriched uranium that could build a large stockpile or a large arsenal via rapid clandestine breakout, as well as a country with a large and rapidly growing missile arsenal. So the goal of the war mainly is twofold: to inflict maximum damage on Iran's nuclear and missile programs, as well as the military-industrial infrastructure that supports these efforts. There are subsidiary actions that Israel is engaged in, such as air defense suppression, but it's in order to serve this larger goal. With regard to fomenting regime change, I'll leave that to the others to talk about. I think that's an aspirational rather than a formal goal of the war. In terms of progress, I think it's clear to say that experience in Iraq, for instance, in 1991 with the US, and experience in bombing other kind of military industries from the air in World War II, as well as in other wars, shows that you can inflict significant damage, but you cannot destroy a large, dispersed, and hidden, and in Iran's case, a hardened and buried nuclear program or missile program array just from the air. And there's likely to be significant residual capability at the end of the war. Now, the Israeli National Security Advisor, Tzachi Hanegbi, said as much last Friday in a TV interview when he said that, quote, destroying Iran's nuclear program cannot be done by kinetic means. And he adduced the example of South Africa's nuclear program and Libya's nuclear program as potentially alternative models, kind of a negotiated dismantling of these programs. So what's the end game here? So one would be a return to negotiations under more favorable conditions. That's one option. And I'll note that Iran will probably need sanctions relief more than ever before, which will be essential to rebuilding its military and damaged infrastructure and preserving regime stability. So there'll be strong incentives for it to return to the negotiating table. But what if that proves unattainable, or if Iran proves unwilling to negotiate? What then? So let me just look at what they might be left with at the end of the war based on this kind of interim assessment of the Israeli war effort. First of all, it seems pretty clear that Israel has destroyed the pilot fuel plant at Natanz, which was the above ground, a rather small facility that was engaged in the production of high-enriched uranium. There's disagreement over what kind of damage may have been done to the underground facility, the underground centrifuge halls at Natanz. At the very least, the Israelis cut off the electricity to it through bombing, and in an uncontrolled shutdown, it's likely that a large number of centrifuges were damaged. But again, it's not clear whether they've succeeded in kind of caving in the centrifuge hall. Fordow, which is really the long pole in Iran's nuclear program, and it's really the most important facility, thus far seems largely untouched. And this is much more deeply buried than the Natanz facility. And this will have to be dealt with if the Israelis want to be able to claim a success in this war, one way or another, either through bombing or through dismantlement after the war. They also hit sites at Esfahan where they had high-enriched uranium stockpiles. It's not clear whether they were able to hit some of the stockpiles of high-enriched uranium. They did hit some of the facilities that would be important for weaponization, such as the facility that would be responsible for producing uranium metal. There's also the question of unaccounted for centrifuge components. We know that Iran has been diverting centrifuge components since around 2022. Have these been hit, or could this be used to jumpstart a new program after the war? Nuclear scientists, a large number have been taken out. I have no doubt that will impact on Iran's ability to reconstitute its program should it decide to do so. And then surface-to-surface missiles, a lot of them have been used, several hundred probably, maybe between 300 and 400 have been launched at Israel. Perhaps several hundred more have been destroyed in Israeli strikes. But Iran is believed to have had about 2,000 missiles before the war. So a large inventory likely remains to be destroyed. Part of the problem that Israel faces is that they really have about 200 aircraft that are capable of reaching Iran. And because of the range of the missions, they have a very small weapons loadout. If you look at the pictures of the aircraft heading over to Iran, they are only carrying a very small number of bombs. So they have to rely on large numbers of sorties over time in order to achieve cumulative results. So this is not going to be a short war, and I still think there's a lot to do in this area from Israel's point of view. I mentioned before, what if negotiations to dismantle Iran's program prove unattainable? That means that at the end of the war, we'll probably be returning to the status quo ante, although Iran will have significantly reduced or diminished capabilities. And if Iran tries to rebuild, Israel will probably kind of relaunch, kind of as Israel was fond of saying with regard to Gaza, kind of mow the grass with regard to Iran's nuclear program. And in order to accomplish that, there has to be a favorable and conducive geopolitical environment. And I think that's one reason why they haven't hit Iran's ability to export oil. They don't want escalation in the Gulf, so that it would, first of all, it would probably create a backlash and constrain their operations in this campaign, and probably make it harder for Israel to relaunch operations in the future if they need to do so. They also have enjoyed free air operating over Syria and Iraq, and now Iran, because they've cleared Iranian airspace from air defenses. Can this situation be maintained after the war, especially if Syria gets Turkish aid in rebuilding its armed forces? That's a question that has to be asked. And also, just as a bunch of other questions with regard to will the United States countenance further follow-on strikes if Israel deems it necessary? Iran will also probably continue its ongoing hardening and burning efforts, which will make it harder to operate in the future against a reconstituted Iranian nuclear program. Let me just make a few comments about deterring and dissuading Iran from attempting a breakout. One of the arguments against preventative action is that it'll further incentivize Iran to obtain the bomb in the aftermath of such a conflict, that it'll, especially in the wake of the destruction of much of its military capability, its conventional military capability, it'll need a nuclear option. I will just mention that Iran is more likely to emerge from the war even more vulnerable and weaker than it was before, and that would be exactly the worst possible time to attempt a breakout, especially after having being on the receiving end of punishing Israeli strikes, and especially if there is an American strike either in this conflict, if America joins the war, or America threatens if Iran goes down this path, then U.S. will join and use its B-2s against it. Also, the war also demonstrated the degree to which Iran's nuclear program is penetrated by Israeli intelligence. And that only underscores the risk of sabotage or diversion to nuclear weapons if they attempt to go down this path. So many of the factors that I think have constrained Iran in the past will actually be stronger after this war. And also, look, Iran has been attacking a nuclear armed state, Israel. And therefore, it's not clear to me that in a nuclear Iran would necessarily be offer the protection that those who advocate for it in Iran would hope for. So I'm just going to finish now in my final 30 seconds with just a few comments. I know Dennis is going to talk about how this ends. I'll just throw out just three possible ways it ends. One or the other side runs out of missiles and perhaps seeks to escalate by other means in order to continue the fight, or in order to get U.S. intervention to get the war to end. That's one way. Another is military exhaustion, fear of domestic unrest in Iran, or the threat of U.S. military intervention leads Iran to accept renewed nuclear negotiations. And the third is regime change, although I don't really see a path to that at this point, though I don't rule it out. So, because we've seen in previous wars in Iraq in 1991, after the most recent Israel-Lebanon war in Syria, and after the Israeli War of Independence in 1948, we had coups in Syria and Egypt several years after the war. So I don't rule it out, but I don't see a path in Iran right now to this way of ending the war. So anyhow, I conclude my comments, and I look forward to hearing what my colleagues have to say.
All right, thank you very much, Mike. Very useful, very helpful to set the stage for our understanding of what is actually going on. I want to turn now to Zohar Palti. Again, Zohar is in Israel, and so we'll benefit greatly. Hopefully, everything is safe and secure for you and your family, Zohar. And I want to thank you for joining us in today's program. Turn the floor to you.
So much, Rob. It's great to be again with the Washington Institute family, and thank you for all the email, WhatsApp, whatever. We're doing good, and thank you for your concern. I will speak fast because I don't know when there will be sirens over here, and then I will have to leave you. So I'll try to be very focused about what's going on over here. We spoke so many times in the last 1.5 years in our review, and I used the word that October 7 was an earthquake, and there will be follow of aftershock. What we see right now is another huge aftershock. It's after we took all the territory of Gaza and trying to take Hamas down and reduce the level of hostility from the Hamas after October 7. Later on in September, we took down all the leadership of Hezbollah. We dismantled dozens of thousands of rockets from Hezbollah. Then Bashar regime in Syria collapsed, meaning the axis of evil that used to run by Iran in the last 20, 30 years was on the verge of really shock. And the only missing link over here was who is the head of the octopus. It's Iran. And we always told everybody that one day when we'll feel under stress regarding the nuclear program, the military nuclear program for Iran, we will do it. So many people used to ask us, guys, you have the ability to do it alone without the Americans, things like that. It seems to me that we gave the answer twice. In April 2024, when we got like 300 air breathers, what we call 100 surface-to-surface ballistic missiles, 100 cruise missiles, 100 UAVs, all of them used to be down. I think that from a strategic point of view, this was the biggest mistake ever that the leader of Iran have done, because he broke the psychological barrier of the Israelis to be afraid from the Iranians. And second mistake was October 24. We understood that we can deal with that. And I'm jumping for those days, the minute I will go what happened in the last 1.5 years. Guys, after 36 hours, 48 hours, the Israeli Air Force is flying all over Iran freely. We can do whatever we want on Iran soil. 5 minutes ago, there is not any more official TV broadcast in Iran. We took down all the studios of the TV in Iran. And just to show them that if they were not going to stop, and if they're going to continue to launch ballistic missiles against Tel Aviv, Rehovot, Bat Yam, and to kill civilians, by the way, we are targeting only military RGC facilities, not civilians. We're using a very pinpoint ammunition. Guys, we will do slowly, we will peel all your elements in Iran. Now, going back, after October 7, we didn't have to do a discussion. We're sick and tired that every bunch of idiots that have the ability to launch rockets, that they want to challenge with Qassam missiles, ballistic missiles, anti-tank missiles from the north, from the south, from Iran, have the ability to paralyze Tel Aviv. We felt that enough is enough. That's the reason that any rockets that we are facing right now from Gaza, from Hezbollah, from Iran, we are using completely all our capabilities in order to dismantle that. Now, there is not a big, everybody says, so what the strategy? The strategy that we sick and tired and we want to protect our family. Simple as that. Going back to Iran, we felt that we have a strategic let's say, opportunity right now to deal with this issue because the Middle East is changing, because we have so many signs that the Iranians are pushing for the military nuclear capabilities. And that's the reason that all the picture right now is coming to the same place. First time that Israel is conducting a war with a country since 73. All the operation, all the war that we used to have since 73, we used to be with terrorist organizations like Hezbollah, like Hamas, operation in Gaza, operation in Lebanon. We called the first Lebanon war, the second Lebanon war, but it wasn't with the states of Lebanon. Iran is the first time that the Iranians since 88, since the war with Iraq, Tehran is facing and see what American aircraft fly over by Israeli pilots, what is meant to be, let's say, adversary or rival of the states of Israel. America never bombed in Iran, never bombed Tehran. It's the first time that the Iranians right now in Tehran, in Shiraz, in all over Iran, feel what is to be in a war. And as I said before, we're doing above Tehran right now, we're flying with the Israeli Air Force, like we're flying above Beirut, Damascus, or Gaza. Dozens and hundreds of raids of the Israeli Air Force, 1,500, 1,800 kilometers away from home. Now, we had like very rough night last night. We have quite few fatalities, casualties. We pay heavy price for that. We knew it's going to be tough. We anticipated hundreds of casualties in the first 2 days. Every guys that we are losing over here, it's devastating and terrible, but relatively we are kind of surprised that for the time being, it's much less than we anticipated at the beginning. As I mentioned before, they're launching against Haifa, against Tel Aviv, meaning they're launching all the ballistic missiles. Probably you see the video clips and the YouTubes. It's devastating. These ballistic missiles are really, really severe, but still we intercept most of them, of course, as you know, and we have outstanding help, like always, in defense from our only friends, the United States of America. Now, in a couple of days, we're going to fulfill the missions of most of the nuclear targets will be over. This is an options in a couple of days. The first, let's say, milestone that we can go out and to finish this issue. Two options over here. One, that our best friends will deal with only one target that need to say the mission accomplished and this is for due. The second option, that our friends are not going to do it. In both of the cases, there is a room that the G7 that today and tomorrow are going to meet in Canada will call us to a ceasefire. I'm not so sure, meaning I'm sure, and I'm not ruling it out that we will say yes. Now, two options over here, whether the Iranian will say yes, okay, and if they will say no, we are going to plan B to the contingency. The contingency is that everything is on the table. Probably there will be some question whether the leader, whether the leadership, whether everything, I'm telling you guys, everything is on the table. All limits off. If they will continue for weeks and to drag us, there will be no boundaries from our side. For the time being, we're focusing only about RGC, nuclear facilities, surface-to-surface, ballistics, and things that related to army and to military. But later on, if the Iranian will drag us, and based on our aerial superiority, based on my experience, nothing will be off the road, meaning everything will be on the table. Now, what we can achieve over here. First of all, for the time being, we did not touch the energy side, the big ones, it's on the table. We didn't touch all the leadership, all the headquarters and the bases of the Basij in the province. We will do it. We didn't touch all the military tiny bases all over the province of Iran. We will come to it. And I'm saying, not that we want to be there. It seems to me that there is a great chance that it might be a solution in a couple of days if there will be initiative. But if not, we're ready to continue with this issue. And some people are saying, Zohar, what is the strategic? I'm trying to give answer what I'm giving in the media and what I'm giving to my friends, the Americans. What is strategic goal over here? The strategic goal is, first of all, to push away the fact that the Iranian will run to a military bomb like we felt in the Intel in the next few months. Secondly, to change the Middle East in a way that the head of the octopus is not going to build any more all the surrogate or all the, the ring of fire all over Israel, like he used to do with Hamas, with Hezbollah, the Houthis, and the other ones. And maybe we'll have a chance over here after this campaign and after this war for a couple of years, decades of something else in the Middle East. I see great opportunity over here. We just need leadership, mainly leadership in Israel, to understand that we have this opportunity with Lebanon, with Syria, with other countries. And by the way, I'm not ruling that if there will be change in Iran, the Israelis have nothing against the Iranians, and no doubt the Saudi that will come to the Abraham Accords. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Zohar, and I hope you can stay with us throughout the program, that we're not interrupted. All right, we'll turn now to Dana. Dana, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much. I'd like to start by framing U.S. policy, what it has been towards Iran's nuclear program and where it could go. So first of all, reflecting back on the past 5 presidential administrations, both Democrat and Republican, varying widely in approaches to how the U.S. should pursue its interests in the Middle East. Most presidents, or all presidents actually, have looked at the challenge of Iran's nuclear weapons ambitions, considered what military force against the nuclear program could or may not accomplish, and reached the conclusion that negotiations and diplomacy to address this issue was preferable to considering military strikes. Of the reasons to not pursue military strikes against Iran's nuclear program, there were 3 main reasons or areas of skepticism, buckets of skepticism. The first is, as Mike Eisenstadt observed, military force can disrupt, delay, or set back the nuclear program, but not completely eliminate it. So the option for rebuilding could always be there. Number 2 is, if military force was used inside Iran, the Iranian retaliatory response would be so destructive that the risk tolerance for those kinds of response options was very low. And the Iranian retaliatory response could range from its ballistic missile program to attacking energy infrastructure in the Middle East and beyond, cyber attacks, etc. As Zohar observed, in terms of responding to Iranian response options like ballistic missile attacks, what 2024 and the Israeli experience showed the world is that actually with multilateral coordinated air defense and even Israel domestically, with its layered, exquisite air defense, civilians can be protected from Iran's ballistic missiles. And the third area of skepticism was that military strikes would likely induce the regime in Iran to rush for the nuclear weapon, not to step back from the nuclear threshold. So I would say, and I would agree with Zohar, in a post-October 7th environment, Israel's risk tolerance has very much changed from these buckets of skepticism. The notion that Iran's retaliatory response can be successfully defeated, that regime decision-making could be affected, and also that even setting back the program is necessary at this point, given how many technical advances Iran had made in its nuclear program. It had only been when Israel started this operation a couple days since the IAEA Director General in front of the whole world essentially said to the Board of Governors in Vienna, there is no possible civilian peaceful explanation for the steps Iran has taken in its nuclear program. So, given all of that, I think it's fair to say, if Israel had had confidence in the trajectory of the US-Iran nuclear talks facilitated by Oman, that it would lead in an outcome that would actually block Iran's pathways to a nuclear weapon, or that the Iranian regime was willing to make the concessions necessary to assure the world that its program was entirely peaceful and it would not seek to preserve options to pursue a nuclear weapon at some time in the future, we would not see this campaign today. The question on the other side of the campaign for US policy options is, what do we do with the time that has been put back on the clock? I would offer that for US policy, there are two overarching interests or objectives at this point in time. The first one is to prevent Iran from retaining the options to pursue a nuclear weapon capability, to block Iran from being able to develop a nuclear weapon capable device, number one. And number two, over the past 4 days, the engagement, Israel and its air superiority and its activities in Iran, and the Iranian retaliatory response are quite limited actually in scope to direct engagement with each other. We have not seen spillover effects of this conflict yet. So the other US interest I would offer at this point in time is to prevent an expansion of the war. While all civilian loss and death is tragic, the collateral damage on both sides remains relatively low at this point. We are one miscalculation, mistake away from a mass casualty event. The Iranians are shooting ballistic missiles at population centers, and many of the Israeli strikes, while clearly designed to be precise, are taking places, some in Tehran, which are in downtown and heavily populated areas. Either by mistake or deliberate calculation on the Iranian side, the scope and aperture of this conflict could be much wider in a way that it drags others into this conflict. So US interests: to use where we are now to actually prevent Iran from crossing the nuclear threshold and to prevent further expansion or spillover effects of this war. Okay, next I want to talk about what the United States is doing right now and the different elements of the policy toolbox it could provide at this moment in time. We saw within 24 hours of the initiation of the Israeli campaign, the National Security Advisor and Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, warning that the US was not a party to this operation and that any targeting of US interests or US personnel in the Middle East would be met with a strong response. As of today, there is damage to the US Embassy branch office in Tel Aviv at the hands of an Iranian ballistic missile. There has been the downing of a drone that was heading for the US consulate in Erbil, and US service members at the Al-Assad Air Base in Western Iraq have already had to take cover from incoming ballistic missiles. It is fair to argue and reassess at this point whether or not US interests are already being targeted as part of this war, whether or not and how the Trump administration is thinking about responding to the fact that by day 4, US interests and personnel are already at risk, are an area that merits serious attention. Next, things that the United States could do, many options that the United States put into motion after October 7th. Of course, one is senior leader visits, going to Israel, consulting with Israel about the military objectives and then the objectives of the campaign on the other side of the military campaign. Activation of phone calls and demonstrations of diplomatic leadership, consultations across the Middle East, in Europe, and with other allies and partners, activation of the US-led coalition of allies and partners. One area to look would be the G7 that's convening today in Canada. If the US is committed to active diplomacy to, 1, preventing the spillover and expansion of this war, but 2, doubling down that Iran may not have pathways to a nuclear weapon, language and rhetoric coming out of the G7 are a really important place to look. Other things the United States could do to demonstrate its commitment to both of those objectives: increasing its US military posture in the region, committing to resupplying Israel's munition stockpiles, and the weapons that it needs to defend itself from threats, providing logistics support to Israel's military operations, and of course, actually entering the conflict and joining in offensive military operations. I lay these out as options that should be on the table, not that there should be a certain decision or outcome, but these are the range of options that U.S. decision makers in the White House should be actively discussing at this time. A few indications of where the Trump administration is going. As we're speaking now, an aircraft carrier group is heading to the region. The president has spoken about his commitment to ensuring Israel will have resupply of its munitions. So we are seeing at least indications that from a resourcing perspective, the United States has skin in the game in terms of supporting Israel's defense from Iranian attacks. Not yet a decision to enter the conflict in an offensive manner, but again, U.S. interests and personnel have been attacked and are at risk, even though there has not been loss of life. Finally, the scope of what the Israeli campaign looks like now is not just elimination of the knowledge set and the infrastructure of Iran's nuclear program, but elements of a decapitation strategy to take out the leaders and the command and control of the Iranian security state. The question on the other side of military force, given that the trajectory of the nuclear talks prior to this operation did not appear headed to an area that would, one, reassure the world that Iran would not retain pathways to a nuclear weapon, and two, that the regime would not be willing to make concessions to assure the world that it only had peaceful ambitions. The question on the other side of these military operations by Israel is whether or not the regime has softened to either making concessions, entering negotiations in a more sincere and confidence-building manner. This is not something that Israel and Iran can work out directly. There is a need for others to fill this space. Again, a really important area for U.S. diplomacy and leadership. If the assumption holds that Iran still does not seeks to avoid direct war with the United States, the Trump administration could at this moment in time put a lot on the table through announcements and certain actions to make it clear that it remains committed to preventing Iran from getting a nuclear weapon capability. Of course, the answer everyone is asking here in the United States is, will the U.S. enter the war and help Israel finish it or not? I think much depends on what happens in the coming days, what Israel does in the next stages of its military campaign, what President Trump hears at the G7, what he hears from leaders in the region, whether or not Israel makes such significant progress in eliminating the Iranian nuclear threat that it is clear that some amount of U.S. participation could end this in a way that then opens the pathways for peaceful resolution of Iran's nuclear program. And finally, as the Iranian regime thinks through its options, I do think that the Syria case study is one that needs to be held by analysts at this moment in time, which is so much of the U.S.-led sanctions architecture in Syria was tied to the Bashar al-Assad regime as a state sponsor of terrorism. So as we think through whether the regime is at a peak situation of vulnerability inside Tehran and what could happen in the regime, if the nature of the regime changes or the nature of the government changes, the United States has demonstrated that it's willing to offer options for the Syrian people, that it had no ill will and wants to actually help Syria stabilize for the Syrian people. And we've seen from President Trump and others a desire to support the Iranian people, just not the Iranian regime. So looking at that Syrian case study and when the United States is willing to contemplate sanctions relief, I think it's something that everyone should be thinking about as we look at what comes in the next days with respect to Israel's campaign in Iran. I'll stop there.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Dana. Dennis, I'm going to turn to you and just a historical framing question. Zohar mentioned, of course, that this is the first Israeli state-to-state conflict since 1973. Well, of course, that conflict ended with American diplomacy that opened up a whole new avenue from that was far different and opportunities that were far more advantageous than when that conflict began. So is there that sort of avenue that might be available for inventive American diplomacy today? Well, let's see what you have to say. The floor is yours. Audio, please. There you go.
Yes, I appreciate that. The question is, are we at such a decisive turning point as then? The answer is, at one level, absolutely. We've seen a dramatic change in the regional balance of power. That dramatic change in the regional balance of power, now including a dramatic weakening of Iran, creates an opening for diplomacy. But it also requires a clear-sighted view of what we want to achieve. Dana was outlining what she felt our key objectives ought to be. Diplomacy should always be guided by a combination of what's truly important to us, what's feasible, what are the means we have, what are the stakes we have, how do we marry all of that? You look at the current situation. I'm in Jordan right now. One of the striking things that I have heard since I've been in the region, having been in Israel first, one of the striking things I've heard is that the Iranians are reaching out to a number of different Arab states to say they're ready to negotiate. One might think, well, maybe this is some Israeli disinformation. It's not, because I'm hearing it from a number of sources who have heard directly from the Iranians saying they're ready for negotiations. The foreign minister himself, Arachi, said, we're prepared to stop if the Israelis stop. So what's going on here? I think what's going on here is that the Iranians, in fact, feel acutely vulnerable for all sorts of reasons, not the least of which is, look at the fact that they had what was a proxy network. That proxy network is basically silent, meaning we're not seeing rockets coming out of Iraq. The Houthis were always limited in terms of what they can do. The Hezbollah option in terms of saturating Israel, hitting Israel with tens of thousands of rockets is gone. So on the outside, a huge investment was made by the Iranians, and that investment has come up empty. Cost them a lot, but come up empty, especially with Assad also gone. So there's a vulnerability on the outside from that standpoint. There's a vulnerability domestically, given the state of their economic circumstances, given the state of their profound, ironically, power shortages, water shortages. A country that produces oil and natural gas can't keep the lights on in its schools, in its government offices, in businesses. So there's an acute sense of vulnerability there. But what's far more to the point is you've seen the decapitation of the Iranian military, including the decapitation of the Revolutionary Guard, including at least parts of the leadership of the Basij, the real watchdogs and protectors of the regime itself. So it doesn't surprise me that there is an Iranian interest in wanting to bring this to an end. A preoccupation of the Islamic Republic's leaders from its very beginning has been survival. One of the things they've never wanted is to get into a conflict with the United States. One of the striking things here, Zohar said, look, maybe there's a ceasefire that comes out of the G7, that the Iranians agree to it, Israel agrees to it. The question I have in that regard is, how does that relate to what Israel needs to achieve coming out of this war? Zohar, you said basically we have rewritten, the idea is rewrite the rules. We're not accepting any more of these threats ever again. The question in my mind is, does a ceasefire at this point, how do you relate a ceasefire at this point to that particular conclusion that you want to be able to draw? I'm not yet sure about that. I think it comes back very heavily to what we're prepared to do. We need to have, and this gets at something that Dana was saying, I would hope that we have a very intimate dialogue with Israel right now on fully understanding the whole target array, the hierarchy of targets, those targets that the Israelis felt were essential to destroy. Where is Israel in regard to those targets that they felt were essential to destroy? There are those that are essential to destroy. There are those that are important but not necessarily essential, and there are those that are desirable. The Trump administration needs to know where that is. because that can also inform what we're prepared to do and say with the Iranians. Now, here I would get it. There's a little bit of a tension, not a surprise. There's oftentimes a tension between objectives. How you choose between objectives that are in conflict reflects what your priorities are. Dana said we don't want an expansion of the war. In the abstract, that's true. But our readiness to be prepared to go to the Iranians and say, we are prepared to bring this war to an end. We are prepared to go to the Israelis and say, that's it. But we will only do that based on the following. And that's based on the following has to be an objective that Iran is giving up the nuclear weapons option. Dana, this is what you said. And I agree. The question, we have to define that, though, not just rhetorically. We have to define it quite practically. Now, the Iranians, I think, will be loath to look like they've completely surrendered. The question for them is always going to be, what threatens their survival the most? They have always wanted to avoid a direct conflict with us. Always. They have made tactical concessions whenever they thought the threats or the price to them was too high. If we want to end this war in a way that's consistent with our objective, and that objective should be, A, they give up for good the nuclear weapons option. B, they give up the pursuit of a large-scale ballistic missile program, certainly one, a long-range one. And thirdly, they give up again, rebuilding a proxy network. We can't have an outcome where there's going to be sanctions relief. Dana was talking about, we have to be prepared to be in a position to offer them something. That's fair. But they need to understand that whatever we're prepared to offer them disappears if we see them beginning to violate any of this. They need to see that there's also a consequence of this. Now, what makes all of this, in my mind, potentially more credible is the Trump administration prepared to say to the Iranians, this war, if it continues to drag on, is going to pull us in. We have no interest in getting involved directly in the war. But if you continue this without stopping it, you are going to draw us in. And we will do dramatically more to you than what the Israelis are doing. So you have a choice. You have a choice of going along with concluding this war based on a set of principles, or you run the risk that the U.S. will be involved. Now, what I'm describing seems to go against the grain of the Trump administration. The president will make threats that we might, that we don't want to be involved, but we could be. I think he is preserving an option, which is fair enough. Whatever he says in public is one thing. We should be communicating to the Iranians something very different in private. And that they, if this doesn't stop, and it doesn't stop on the set of terms we're talking about, they run the risk of bringing us in. This also gets to the point of what Dana was talking about in terms of, do we get involved as it relates to Fordo or not? I think the administration's instinct is not to be involved. But I think the question from a diplomatic standpoint is, how do we effectively use the threat of coercion to back our diplomacy? I can tell you, I've never been involved in any negotiation where the role of coercion wasn't front and center. When you're not prepared to apply it, your chances of success in the negotiations is very low. We're at a point where the acute vulnerability of the Iranians gives us a kind of leverage. We have to be prepared to apply it. Whether we'll be prepared to apply it, seems to me, depends a lot on what happens in the next few days, but it also depends a lot on what our understanding with the Israelis is at this moment in terms of how well they have done in terms of truly weakening and addressing the target sets related to the nuclear infrastructure and also to ballistic missiles. The vulnerability the regime in Iran feels is in large part also tied to the decapitation of the military and the IRGC. I think they're still in a state of shock. I think the command control system there has also been dramatically weakened. I think that helps to explain why they're as interested as they appear to be in wanting to have a ceasefire. A ceasefire for them rescues them. A ceasefire should not come without a price. I'll stop there.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Lots on the table here. Again, if you want to get into the conversation, please use the Q&A function of your Zoom bar, which I'm monitoring, or send an email directly to me at rsatloff, RSATLOFF, at washingtoninstitute.org. All right, we had some a very polite disagreement, or at least differing views on certain issues. I want to bring this out for our viewers. First, targeting the leadership. Zohar, you said that this is likely to become a certainly on the table if the Iranians in a couple of days persist in targeting Israeli civilians. And Mike Eisenstadt, you said it at the moment it doesn't seem to be on the table, and it usually and you thought it was unlikely it will be on the table, if I understood your comment. Just let's assess what are the pros and cons, the factors, the implications of actually trying to target the political leadership of the Islamic Republic. Zohar?
I'm not suggesting that we have to do it. I'm just saying that if the Iranian would try to drag us to a long conflict over here, and if they will continue not to pinpoint and to target military targets like we're doing, and if there will be, God forbid, a lot of casualties in our cities, there will be a price for that. Simple. And I'm not saying why not to do it. I'm not advocating to do it right now. We could do it in the first day. You know, we took a lot of them when they have been under conception that we are not going to do something like that. We choose not to do it because all the good reasons that probably Mike will say in a minute. I'm not arguing with that. But if things will come to the point that what I was describing a couple of minutes ago, everything will be on the table. First of all, we'll go and we'll take down all the oil facilities. Secondly, we'll take the gas facilities. Third, we will go and find out all the focal points of the regime in the province, because we want to see that there will be, I know to destroy, I know, believe me, I used to deal with all the target bank in the last 20 years. And we have thousands of targets in Iran. Iran is huge. In Gaza and in Lebanon, we used to have dozens of thousands. You can imagine how much targets we have inside Iran. Whether I'm preaching to do it? No. I think that we have a good opportunity to close this issue in a very short time. With some help from the Americans and the Europeans, I think that we have the ability to do it. But if the Iranian will choose and if the Iranian will hit our families, it's on the table.
Okay. Mike, any further comment on this issue?
The only thing, I mean, I agree with Zohar. This is the kind of threat that's best put out there but held in reserve. I also just think that I know this is kind of, among specialists, I think there'd be agreement. Among the general kind of observers might be surprised at this. I think it's, first of all, the supreme leader has, by his constitution and his life experience, is he tends towards caution, and he's a careful operator, and he will be further. I think a lot of that's the result of the Iran-Iraq war, and now he has a second trauma, this war, that he has to bear with him. So I think it's better that he remains in power, and as a wounded leader with this, the memory of the mistakes he made, which got his country into this trouble. So I think it's, but get the people below him, people on the Supreme National Security Council who are in some way in the military chain of command who are civilians. The military targets is obvious, they are legitimate, but so are people elsewhere in the chain of command. With regard to oil facilities, just one last thing, what the Israelis are doing in terms of hitting storage facilities and refineries that service the domestic market is good. Because this has the potential to create domestic instability, which puts pressure on the regime, and it creates further pressure on the need for sanctions relief in order for them to be able to afford the subventions that they give for food and oil and stuff like that in order to keep the population quiet. But don't go for the stuff that could lead to escalation in the Gulf, such as their export facilities, because I think that will create a backlash against Israel and will be destabilizing in the end.
So let me ask about Fordo, which has come up in this conversation a number of times, and more generally about the question of the stockpile of Iran's enriched uranium, which is obviously not something that will be addressed solely by bombs being dropped from Israeli planes. What is the strategy for safeguarding the stockpile, and how do you think Israel is proceeding with that strategy? Comments?
I mean, the Iranians have said they've dispersed it already. I don't know if there's truth to that they put it in kind of taken special measures. I think the term they used in order to disperse it and put it in safe places. I mean, that's very important because, clearly to the degree that you can degrade or destroy the stockpile of enriched uranium, you're setting back the program potentially years. You also want to get, like I said, those centrifuges that may have been diverted that have been produced in the last few years. And again, I don't know if the Israelis know where that is. But the bottom line is, if they cannot weaponize the material, if you've destroyed their ability to weaponize, and some of what the Israelis have done at Isfahan will affect that. In the end, their only option is to sit on the enriched uranium. But again, a lot of this stuff is not necessarily high tech. I mean, the Chinese, when they created their atom bomb, used a regular lathe to convert to kind of shape the core for their bomb. So and you could probably there's probably ways you could jury rig a furnace in order to mold the metal. So that might be, you might get some short-term benefit from that, but I'm not sure that gives you long-term benefit. Ultimately, denying them access to their stockpile of high enriched uranium and low enriched uranium is key.
Look, I would just say it's another argument probably for going after Fordo, because I suspect there's a lot of stored highly enriched uranium there. This is a site they think is the most secure one they have. So, and they have a view, which is probably not wrong, that Israel doesn't have the means to go in and destroy Fordo, at least in any conventional sense.
I will just add here that we have seen in the past year remarkable displays of creative use of the military instrument. First, with what the Ukrainians demonstrated with their attack on Russian fighter aircraft and at Russian military bases deep inside Russia, relying on months of preparation and infiltration inside Russia. And Israel has also demonstrated exquisite ability to build networks and penetrate deep inside Iran. Generally, when we've spoken about the challenge of Fordo and the nature of its very deeply buried facilities, we tend to think about this challenge in a conventional sense and dismiss the idea that Israel could do it on its own, because only the United States has the platforms and the munitions to do this conventionally from the air. I would simply offer here that I think what Israel and the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, have demonstrated is remarkable creativity in an unmatched network of surrogates. So there are creative options out there. And number two, we saw a demonstration of the United States' ability to get at hard and deeply buried facilities when it deployed B-2 bombers to the base Diego Garcia and used them to take out munitions facilities of the Houthis in Yemen inside mountains. So the Iranian regime should at least take note that the United States has the capability. It's only a question of will it, or will it not? And when it comes to the Israelis, quite creative uses of the military and intelligence instruments.
And Dana, just stay with me for a minute in terms of any deeper insight into U.S. decision-making just on the defensive side in terms of assisting Israel. Are there big decisions out there that still need to be made, or do you seem confident that we're doing our part in helping Israel defend itself against the Iranian ballistic missile barrages?
I think there's a question of near-term decisions and medium and longer-term decisions. So in the near term, the United States, without question, is supporting the defense of Israel. It has a THAAD battery in Israel. It has service members on the ground. It has already actively engaged in supporting the defense of Israel in the past 4 days, both in intercepting the attack drones coming from Iran and participating in downing some of the ballistic missiles coming from Iran, both on the ground in Israel and from the sea with our ballistic missile defense capable destroyers. There are reports that more naval platforms, including the USS Nimitz aircraft carrier group, are on their way to the Middle East. So the United States is supporting Israel now. The question is, how long does the Israeli campaign continue? What is the nature of the Iranian retaliatory response? Does it remain ballistic missiles? And we can see from day 1 to day 4, first it was 100 ballistic missiles. Yesterday it was 65 ballistic missiles. Some of this is about Israeli progress in taking out the missile launchers and the dispersion of the missiles. Some of it might be about Iranian decisions to preserve some of those missiles. If the Iranians choose to retaliate in other ways, energy infrastructure, soft targets, more attacks against U.S. personnel, military bases, installations, then I think the nature of what might be required for the United States to support Israeli defense will change. And those will be very significant decisions in terms of reprioritizing from the Asia-Pacific theater or others. Then there's the questions of munitions supply. What Israel's doing now will need to be replenished. So will the United States maintain its support for very high levels of military assistance to Israel and ensuring that we both continue to transfer and have the political support for military sales to Israel, and also that our own defense industrial base is vibrant enough to continue to keep pace with what our allies and partners need. That requires whole of government, deliberate, coherent, and concise planning and budgeting and strategic thinking from the Trump administration.
Okay, thank you. Zohar, I'm getting a number of questions along the following lines. Israel's effective operations in Iran, are they having an impact on Hamas decision-making? Are you any closer to take advantage of your impressive operations in Iran to compel Hamas to let the hostages return to their homes?
First of all, thank you for who asking this question. It's very not right by me, an hour not to mention the hostages. And thank you for that. Yes, the hostages, this is one of our first priority, and that's the reason that eventually there is a potential that if President Trump will launch kind of initiative with the Iranians, he should think about doing a dual initiative. Because, as you know, I don't want to get into that, but there is a political outcome if the Prime Minister will decide to call off ceasefire in Gaza to get the hostages and to take the IDF out and to finish the war in Gaza. It seems to me that right now, if there will be ceasefire or end of the war in Iran, after presumably that we are going to go out from this conflict quite okay, that's mean that we will be more generous in order to give President Trump exactly what Witkoff want, that the Israeli would stop the war in Gaza in order to get the 20 hostages, the live one, and the 35 dead hostages we still have. I think that we should think about simultaneously to close these two scenes. We have good opportunity over here. We should take it if the president will come with a serious initiative. And when I'm listening to Dennis and his impression from Jordan and what we are reading right now, and President Trump just referred to that like 10 minutes ago, that he said, yes, we're getting messages from the Iranians that they want to find a solution, and there are statements from the Iranians. Maybe we have also potentially to bring the hostages back and to finish the war with Gaza.
Can I add to that, Rob?
Yeah, please.
I was going to raise this as part of an end game. I can imagine if the president decides that he's going to have us intervene to try to end the war, that he will want it to also involve Gaza as well. Now he also can understand. I'm gonna put it in my words, not Zohar's, because it's also easier for me to say this. I think Prime Minister Netanyahu, if it looks like this has been successful in Iran, politically he's in a stronger position to make a decision to end the war in Gaza as well, and to basically face down any opposition from within his own coalition. I think his attitude under those circumstances, his whole approach to his political circumstances, would be quite different if that's the case. That presumes that this looks like it has been not just successful militarily, but it has also been successful politically in a way that translates a set of results that really does mean Iran has now become far less of a threat, not just now, but over time.
Of course, if you take that to its logical conclusion, regime change in Iran would certainly open up opportunities closer to home.
It's very possible, although, as Mike was suggesting, yeah, you don't know exactly what replaces this regime. As bad as this regime is, you don't know exactly what replaces it. If you want to produce the deals I was just describing, you have to have an address within Iran.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Very interesting final set of comments connecting the military effort in Iran to important strategic issues from Gaza all the way around the region. I want to thank my colleagues, Mike Eisenstadt, Zohar Palti, Dana Stroll, and Dennis Ross from joining from the three countries in which you're located. Thank you for joining this important Washington Institute Policy Forum. We'll be back within a few days with further special events looking at all aspects of a conflict which is transforming the landscape and which is testing the Trump administration's Middle East policy, unlike in any way it's been tested so far. Thank you for joining us today. Good afternoon.